This is the Venturing Angler Podcast. I'm Tim Harden. In this episode, we're talking with Derek Bird from Fly Fusion Magazine about Fly Fusion, the International Fly Fishing Film Festival, his new book, and much more. Let's chat with Derek. All right, we're here with Derek Bird, author and founding editor of Fly Fusion Magazine and of the International Fly Fishing Film Festival. Welcome to the Venturing Angler Podcast.
Thanks so much, Tim. I'm excited to chat with you today. It's been a few years, hey, since we've chatted. I think, I think we pinned it at somewhere between like maybe 5 and 7 years.
That's a pretty good range, but now that we're both old, time flies, right? Is that what we concluded?
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. Yeah,
and I don't think either of us are old, but time does fly.
Well, in my mind, I'm still young, right? I still get out and hike the streams and have lots of fun there. But I do have to say, the older I get, the more kind of the years run together a little bit. But yeah, no, it's been a while. I think the last time we chatted was probably at a trade show in Orlando.
I think so. Yeah. I remember meeting and having some laughs and then hanging out. And I do have to say, you do more than hike some streams. You do some pretty cool adventurous stuff that we'll get into because I get pretty excited about it, and I'm eager to talk about it. But I remember the first time I saw Fly Fusion Magazine, and that was a long time ago. When did you guys start?
Oh man. It's funny because I should know the exact date. But we got started, I think it was in 2003, around there. So I think that we've been around for just over 20 years now. And it's actually like, I'm considered the founding editor of the magazine. But it was my brother's idea. Like, my family, we started a trade show, and it was called the Western Canadian Fly Fishing Exposition. It was out of Calgary that we did it, and that ran for a number of years. But there was kind of like talk of like, oh, maybe we should have like a magazine for the trade show. So we kind of threw that around, and then in the end, my brother Chris, who's kind of a big ideas kind of guy, not just a big ideas kind of guy. He's not somebody that'll kind of sit on an idea. He's just kind of like, when a good idea comes, he jumps at it and he goes for it, right? So he figured that Canada had room for a fly fishing magazine, and so he called me up one day and said, hey, I've got this idea. I think that there's space in Canada for a magazine and for a fly fishing magazine, and because of your educational background and your passion, would you be interested in kind of forming a vision with me and getting it going? And so that's what we did. We got it going. He was I would say it's like his, I would say it's his baby, right? Like it's kind of his blood, sweat, and tears that kind of were there right from the very start. And then I kind of threw around a lot of ideas and came up with a name and that type of thing. So and so we both kind of had, used our skill sets and came up with what we came up with, and now we're excited because it started as kind of like this, this Canadian magazine, but now it's very much international. So it's all over the place, right? And we love that. And my brother, I would say he's a marketing genius. Like he saw a need and he capitalized on that need. And then he kind of formed this, essentially this fly fishing community around the magazine, where he built up, we have a television show that's associated with the magazine. And then we also have a film festival that's kind of it's an arm of, or a branch of, or associated with, I would say, the magazine as well. And so Yeah, so it's been a ride, Tim. It's been very much a ride. It's been exciting. It's taken me to some really, really cool places. Yeah, because every once in a while, a rod company calls up or they would call up and say, yeah, we've got this new rod. Do you want to come up to Alaska and test it out with us? And I'd be like, yeah, okay, let's go and do that, right? And so yeah, so it's been a really cool way to work at a career and to write, and yeah, it's been a very cool thing to do.
For all the kids out there, in 2003, fly
Yeah,
fishing media was quite different, and at times, looking through a magazine was painful. The images were not where they are now, and the
yeah,
layout was not where it is now. It was for a
yeah,
lot of good magazines at that time. The layout was a lot where magazines were in the mid '90s. And when you guys
right,
came around, it was like it stood out so much. Great
yeah,
photography. There was always this is not the best word, but maybe it is, unusual image on the cover of like,
right,
a
yeah,
trout with just like the most vibrant color and, different style of photography on the covers. The
yeah,
logo that popped, the layout was fresh, and it was just so good and is, and was
yeah.
so new at that time. It was outstanding.
That's what, Tim. That's so awesome that you picked up on that because it's like when we entered this space, we wanted to do things differently, and we felt like there were components of fly fishing that were that could be highlighted other than just like the fin and grin,
Right.
right? And it's funny that like just saying what you said, it sounds like you're a bit of a historian of like magazines, but it's just because we grew up with that, right? We didn't I suspect that you and I aren't what would be considered digital natives, right? We didn't we grew up in the era of kind of before, kind of pre social media and such, and so yeah, so I remember, growing up and wanting to go out and get the latest magazine, right? The latest fly fishing magazine. And it was, all the covers were essentially the same. It was like a big grip and grin right on the cover. And the bigger the fish, I'm sure that the more magazines that they sold, right?
Yeah,
And,
true.
but when we came along, it was risky. And I suspect that it was partly the result of like youthful naivety, where it was like, it took us, a couple of years to build to a place where, we could hire like a newsstand consultant, right? Like somebody that says, oh yeah, this works and this doesn't. And it was kind of just raw passion that was
Mm.
like, hey, like we thought it looked good, so let's put that on the cover. And you're right, it was very rarely, I can't remember, like, kind of grip and grins on the cover. It was more like, oh, let's feature like, the side of like a brook trout, or let's hit a really like super close up image of a fly, or let's focus on a fish's eye, or let's focus on like, the fly in a fish's mouth. So it was very much like, oh, you know what? We think that, I'm attracted to really cool shots like that. I think that other people would be too. And it turned out that they very much were. And so it very much kind of allowed, I would say, and I don't want to sound like, we were trendsetters, but I feel like it very much allowed kind of the fly fishing kind of like the image industry as far as fly fishing to like head out. It allowed the industry to become a little bit freer, I think, and go, you know what? There's so many different parts of fly fishing that are attractive, that it's not just kind of the end result. It's not just us holding a fish, right? That people are going to be attracted to. And so that's what we featured. And then we we ended up being able to work with kind of some of the best photographers. And that was like, when you set visions and you set goals for a company and a business, that was like one of the things that was at the top of our list. We were like, we want it to be a little bit, a little bit artistic. We want it to be like visually stunning. And so, so that was the direction that we headed out on. And so it's great that I love that, I love that you picked that up, Tim, because I think that, that's where we went. And then even right down to like, the, like the television show, which, through COVID, we've had to take a break, but kind of like post COVID, we've got huge plans to kind of get things going again. And so that's going to be kind of off to the races in a little bit here. But even with that, we were like, the way it came about is like, essentially I just had surgery and I was sitting in front of the TV because I had like a week and a half off recovering from a surgery. And I was like watching the World Fishing Network, and I was just like, oh my goodness, like, everything was a rub. Like, and I don't want to sound callous or like, we can do everything better. No, it was just kind of like certain observations. Everything was like, we're here fishing with, this guide, and we're like, and Billy Bob from, Billy Bob's Worm Factory is our sponsor. It was kind of like, and I thought to myself, I wonder what it would be like if we featured something that didn't have any, you know what I mean? That didn't have like, kind of like, that wasn't like an infomercial that just allowed an angler who was watching just to simply escape. And so that's what we did. Like, I phoned up my brother and I was like, I was probably hopped up on pain meds at the time, but I said to my brother, I'm like, I said, hey, like, you know what? I'm watching the World Fishing Network, and I think that we can enter this space and we can offer something different. Like we can offer something where people can like just truly escape. And I knew that we had some contacts, in the film industry, like cinematographers that could actually make that happen. And when we approached them and talked that vision with them, they were so ready for it. They were so excited about that vision. And so that's what we did. And there were people that really gravitated towards that. They loved the being able to just simply be on an outing or an excursion to a really remote or cool place and not be kind of like super upfront about, the lodge that we were with or whatever. Right now, the guides that we fished with, they were featured, definitely, right? There'd be a little caption or whatever to say kind of who we were fishing with, but it wasn't like, we never said that, right? It was like, if people want to seek out this guide because they just had this like amazing experience by watching what we just did with them, they'll find him, right? All they need is his name and they'll find him.
Right.
And I have to say that, that's kind of what happened. Like, we know some of the guides that we worked with when we were filming, and they like, they got really busy after, they filmed with us. And not to say that they weren't busy beforehand, but they noticed an uptick. So people, I think, were ready for that too. And so it's so cool that you actually brought that up, Tim. I think that was very astute. That was very perceptive to say that that's kind of where we were off to.
Oh, really? And again, for like the kids out there, I mean, in 2003, I don't know where I was working, but I remember having several jobs where during my lunch break, I would always go to Barnes and Noble almost every single day just to see if a handful of magazines had a new issue, because I couldn't wait. And mentally I'd think like, okay, I usually see this magazine around mid-month, but now it's the third week. Like, what the hell's going on?
Yeah.
And then, not only did these covers just pop so much, it just seemed fun and new. And like you said,
Right.
like what I love about fly fishing is, well, you didn't say this part, but what I love about fly fishing is rarely what I see. Like, I don't engage myself in a lot of fly fishing media because it doesn't like resonate with me. But when I see things like some of the things that you mentioned, like, the side of a brook trout or a fish's eye, like that's what I love. And that's what I get excited about. And Yeah, of course, there were people like Val Atkinson and others at that time who were putting forth that type of photography, but there wasn't a lot of it. Mostly, it was like
Right.
some dude on a trip, and
Yeah.
and it's not me. Like, not that I need to see myself on the cover, but it's like, there's nothing. I'm not passionate about that guy's trip, whereas I am passionate about the things I was
Right.
seeing in Fly Fusion, and it just loved it,
Yeah.
and still do.
You know what? And you know what? Thank you, thank you. You know what else is cool too? Just kind of what you said, and not to reminisce too much, but to maybe allow myself to reminisce a little bit because when you said that, and that's another thing too, right? Is that um, there's kind of like certain common experiences that we have, and something that you just said, like, kind of tapped into a common experience, which is I can remember going to chapters, right? So I remember going to chapters, and I would go, I would go right to the section where all the magazines were, and I would look to see kind of what fly fishing. This is when I was younger, right? Kind of before I was in the magazine industry, where I'd look to see kind of what fly fishing magazines were available at chapters, and I just kind of like pick through them, and I'd look for stories. And I mean, that was like, that was something where it was this experience that I would look forward to, right? And something that we don't really often do anymore. It's kind of like, it's kind of like the days of Blockbuster, right? In a way where it's like, you'd go in and you'd be excited to go and
Yeah,
pick out a movie, right? Whereas we don't have that, we don't necessarily have that experience anymore. So thank you for refreshing that in my memory, because I did very much enjoy that kind of just that, like, which one am I, because back in university or kind of pre-university, you don't have, or I didn't have deep pockets, right? So I couldn't buy like 3 magazines. I could
that's
only
true.
buy one, and
That's true.
kind of like I'd kind of like look
Yeah,
through, and which story do I want to like read the most, right? And so I'd end up like buying that one and kind of just going. And I also loved looking through the ads, because I'm a very visual person, which you can see kind of in our magazine, right? And you mentioned that too, but I'm a very visual person, and I love looking at the ads, and I would look. There were certain rod companies that had really cool ads. I mean, for me, as like as a university student, where I'd just be like, oh, one day I'm gonna like buy that rod, because because that slogan in that advertisement, that makes me want that. And
yeah,
so, I saved up my money and bought, like, and I probably shouldn't mention, rod manufacturer names. But I went out and, like, there was an ad that like captured me so much in a certain magazine that I literally, saved up. And basically the moment that I graduated from university, I bought that rod with the money with a little bit of money that I had left over, right? Or that I had saved up kind of through those years. As soon as I could get it, I got that rod. And it was really cool because I have this hat, and sorry, I'm rabbit trailing a little bit
no,
now,
no,
Tim, but I have this hat, that I've kept for years and years and years, because I can remember one day I had this summer job at a historic site in my university years to kind of help pay my way through university. And I did kind of these education programs teaching, kind of elementary kids about kind of the history of the area that I grew up in. Anyways, one day I was like closing up kind of this one program that I had just taught, and these visitors came by. They're actually from Vancouver Island. And I got talking to the older guy. He was probably, he was traveling with his grandson and his wife. And so I would say he was probably in his 60s at the time, which I thought was ancient, right? As a college student, I thought it was just absolutely ancient. But anyways, his name was Art. I can remember kind of everything about him, because when he came up, he was wearing a hat that advertised the manufacturer of the rod company that I wanted to buy a rod from. And as soon as I saw him, I'm just like, he said something to me like, "Oh, what are you doing? Like, you cleaning up and, from a program or something?" And so yeah, but I love your hat. And he said, "Are you a fly fisherman?" And I said, "I am." I said, "I love fly fishing." He said, "Oh, I bet, this area has some really good some really good fly fishing." I said, "Oh, it does." I said, "That's all I do in the summers. Like after work, I just go out and I fly fish." And I said, "But your hat," I said, "I'm in university right now and all my money goes towards university." I said, "But as soon as I've graduated and I can, get enough money, I'm going to buy a rod from that company that you have on your hat." And we got into this long conversation. It was awesome. And at the end of the conversation, he took a few steps to go away, and then he turned around and he pulled the hat off his head and he walked up to me.
Oh, cool.
And he went to put the hat on my head, and I said, "No." I said, "I can't take your hat." I said, "I didn't tell you that cause I said, it's not because I want your hat. I said, I just told you that because I love that company." He's all, "No." He said, "I want you to have this hat. I want you to have my hat." And I was just like, I was so blown away. So he gave me his hat. I still have that hat to this day.
Oh, nice. Nice.
I have it up in my office, but it's like, it's like you go to these places, right? And it's funny because, when I was growing up, and I'm sure when you were growing up too as well, Tim, we've seen kind of this explosion in fly fishing, which is really cool, right? Where it's like, there's a lot of people that do it. It's kind of gone from niche to, I would say, niche, a little bit unknown, to like niche mainstream now, right? And it was just, back then, it was like when you saw somebody with a hat that was like that represented a fly fishing company, you're like, that's who you gravitated towards at a dinner party, right? That's who you kind of made your way towards, because you're like, hey, you fly fish too. And so it was so unique back then to actually like bump into somebody else that fly fished. I don't know. Does that resonate with you at all?
Totally. Yeah, completely. And, one of the first things I was thinking about was, I remember a rod company came out with a catalog and there was a guy sleeping with his fly rod in a tube. And I was like, that hits my soul. So I had to have that rod, And I think I probably paid off that rod over 5 years on like a credit card, but because I was dumb. But yeah, and then it totally it was so rare to see someone who you could talk about fly fishing with. Like if I went to a get together, I might sit there and not talk to anyone, and then I see someone with a hat or whatever, and I'm like, it could even be an Orvis sweater, and I'm like, okay, there might be hope in this conversation.
There might be a chance, right? There's kind of one out of the 4 million people that fly fishes is actually sitting across the room from me right now.
Yeah,
right? Like magnets to each other, you kind of gravitate. Oh man, that's so true. I love that.
And
I love that. But you know what? It's a different era now. But one thing that's really cool about the magazine that we see, and that even in this different era of social media, is that we've found that specifically with we've done a little bit of research, but specifically with niche industries, magazines are still very, very popular in niche industries. Yeah. And so there's still something about people, wanting to, get something that's of substance, right? And when I mean of substance, I don't necessarily mean content, even though I would say that our content is very much of substance, right? Whether it be the photographers or the articles that we print, but something that they can hold in their hands that's has a beginning and an end, and there's something comforting about that. And so we've seen this, we've seen just kind of this uptick in kind of our, in our sales and in our subscribers. We've seen that, and it's oh, that's so great, because it's there's still, there's lots of room for, for paper still, right? There's lots of room for, for people to want to consume that way. And so anyways, we're really, but it's a very different experience right now. The landscape is, it's very, very different. And to be able to look out across the kind of like, the fly fishing landscape is, it's fascinating because it's gone through, growing pains, and it's gone through, shifts as far as like, how we present kind of information. And right now, boy, do we ever live in an exciting time as far as like, the amount of information that we have at our fingertips, right? Whether it be, if you're like a huge, fly tire, you can kind of watch anything you want on YouTube and kind of get all these different ideas, or you can go to our magazine and like, and kind of find some of the best fly tires there. You can like, you can listen to podcasts. There's just like this plethora of ways that you can be inundated, but in a positive way. I don't mean inundated in a bad way. I just mean like, so not only do we just get to dream about fly fishing anymore, like, which is something that I used to do a lot of when I wasn't fly fishing. Now we can like, we never really, if we don't want to, we never really have to let our minds rest.
Right.
We can like, and be like, oh, I want to know more about this, so I'm going to go and find more about this, right? I want to study, this insect, or I want to like figure out how to cast better. And so we can just go out and do that. And so, some of the young people that I meet in the industry now that are coming up, I'm just like, oh my goodness, like kind of the footing that you have, or that those younger people have now, is like, it's such a solid footing as far as information, right? And kind of wherever you're at, whether you're just beginning or, because fly fishing has a very steep learning curve. But wherever you're at, there's information for you, right? There's kind of like just this endless stream of it for you. So anyways, it's exciting. Even though, we do things very differently, Tim, like you and I, like, between kind of our media platforms, there's kind of room for all of it. And it's like, it's a pretty cool thing to see, right? To be able to work together and to collaborate and, to do all this kind of stuff. It's a really, really cool thing to do, to be able to kind of like help promote certain messages, or help to, promote certain types of education, or whatever it is, right? Or certain, environmental concepts, or whatever it is, right, that we're talking about. So anyways, yeah.
The nostalgia, something something else that I thought about, because you said, you get to hold it. And I hear that so often when people talk about magazines, like, no, you have to hold it. You have to hold it. And, that we don't talk like that about anything else. But for some reason, there's just like something where we're emotionally connected to that experience of like holding the magazine. And it makes it so that it means something. Like the contents of that magazine means something. By the end of this call, I'll have 40 Facebook notifications, by the end of this podcast. And, there's stuff there, but it's not like meaningful. And I remember I was actually working for a magazine in 2007 or 8. And I remember the editor saying, I want you to put together a piece on fly fishing blogs. I think he assigned that to me. At least the magazine was working on it. And I just remember thinking like, oh no, like we can't like do that. Like blogs, like that's awful. Like we're a magazine. Like we're a magazine. Why are we giving a nod to like blogs? Blogs are like gross. Like it's, and I just remember feeling like it was like such a shame. And of course, like that's what I've done for more than a decade or whatever. But, there was something just so special about a magazine that even like mentioning blogs would like hurt us in some way. And but there is that. There's, it's meaningful, and people say that all the time. You just want to hold it. Similarly, like as someone who loves music and used to go to record stores or music stores, when an album would come out and then like I love Bruce Springsteen, the live 75 to 85. Like, okay, here it is. This is something meaningful.
Yeah.
And I used to collect his bootlegs, but found myself getting disappointed when he started releasing more live albums online. I'm like, but there's no like booklet. Like, and
Yeah.
like it's less of an event. It's the same sort of
Right.
thing. So
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, it is. It's like, yeah. When you said bootleg, I remember like I taught in Japan for a year and I actually fly fished a little bit over there too. It was kind of fun, um, but there were certain, and I'm embarrassed to say, like, I bought like a few bootlegs over there because I couldn't really get the originals, and so I bought
yeah.
like this. I remember buying this bootleg of like uh, Roxette. Do you remember the band Roxette? That like Swedish band that like I think they were kind of like flash in the pan. They had like one or two kind of like really good CDs, and then they kind of vanished. But or maybe they didn't. Maybe I just stopped paying attention. I don't know. But yeah, and then the other one was U2.
Yep.
I just I wanted to get them there too, so I did. But just kind of back to what you're saying too about about holding something in our hands. There's something, I think that there's something that we naturally crave about kind of like a beginning and an end, right? Where and kind of like something we hold in our hands has the potential for that, right? Where it's tactile, it's we're kind of in control of like how far we want to read or whatever, and there's kind of a beginning or an end, or we can kind of flip ahead to see oh, I've only got 5 minutes left, am I going to be able to finish this article, or should I stop here? And kind of and so I think that there's something very naturally attractive about kind of that beginning and end concept. But then I think that there's one other thing that's super attractive as well, and it's curated information. And we've and I think that it's fabulous actually that we've gotten away from curated information, but I don't think that it's fabulous that we've entirely gotten away from curated information. Do you know what I mean, Tim? Because it's like there's when I mean curated, I just mean like kind of a gatekeeper, right? So it's like in our magazine, well, we feature like the best of the best writers and the best of the best photographers, right? In our film festival, we feature like the best of the best cinematographers, right? And so there's something to be said about kind of like still paying for some information or paying for kind of some viewing where that it's been, that there's been like a money chain. In other words, some cinematographers are going to get paid because of what they've done and not just kind of put their content up for free, which isn't a bad thing, because I love that there's tons of free content, but I think that we also love that, that there's still kind of some gatekeepers in places that are like, no, this is good, or no, this is better, or this isn't good enough to make the cut. Right. And kind of like, I think that, when we do that, because that's primarily, with YouTube and different social media platforms, that's all left up to us. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing at all. I'm just saying that sometimes it's nice to have somebody else do it for you, right? And I think that that's what the magazine does. That's what the IF4 does, and it kind of promotes, specifically with the IF4, the International Fly Fishing Film Festival. It promotes community as well, and sometimes we lose that in our desire to be connected. We can lose community. We can kind of lose the fact that it's kind of cool to go and show up at a theater and rub shoulders with other people that fly fish, that have the same passions as us. It's kind of cool to watch a film together, and when a guy hooks a huge fish and the fish jumps, that we all collectively gasp, right? Or all collectively kind of we're in awe. And it's nice to know that we're doing that together, because there is something about kind of there's a reminder when we're in community that we're not alone, which I realize is a very obvious concept, but sometimes it's a concept that we can very obviously lose if we're just kind of sitting kind of in our own kind of corner, just scrolling through something, we can lose the fact that, you know, that other people laugh at the same time as us, or, you know, cry at the same time as us, or, you know, are in awe at the same time as us. And knowing that, there's something very human about that, right? Like, do you know what I mean, Tim? Like, there's something like just extremely human about that. And so I think that's one thing too, that the like the IF4, our film festival kind of promotes that. It promotes community, and I love that. I actually love that. So
I do too, and I've been to a number of IF4 events because the Venturing Anglers has for a few years supported some of the California events with Cal Trout.
nice, yeah,
And it's like that. You go there and everyone's like really excited to see each other, you know,
right,
and you know they get quiet for the films, but they're otherwise, you know, it's talking like crazy and talking about rivers and places, and it's almost like, you know, kids on the first day of back to school or something, like excited to, and sort of like you said at like dinner parties, if someone fly fishes, like you're like, wow, you fly fish, you know, soon we'll be able to finish each other's sentences, kind of thing.
right, yeah,
Because there's a bond through the passion, and you really do see that at those events, and it's great. And you know, in many cases, they support, you know, the cause.
yeah. I love what you said about kind of like kids, kind of their first day back at school, right? Where they forget that maybe they really don't like school, and they're just like so excited just to be there with each other, right? They're like, because we love community, and when we spend time in community, oftentimes we're reminded that we have more in common than we don't, right? Which is really cool. And just a, you know, kind of a throwback, and not, you might end up having to label this, you know, this podcast nostalgia, right? Nostalgia with
Right.
Tim and Derek, but but I can remember, because there weren't film festivals for fly fishing when I was younger. Like, there just weren't, right? There was like, you know, there was VHS tapes that you could get and you could like watch stuff that way. But the first time, kind of, I had a few passions growing up, and one of them was skiing. And the first time I remember kind of that collective, you know, collectively watching something that like a whole bunch of people are passionate about was Warren Miller's ski films, right? Like Steep and Deep and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Way back in like the early 90s. And I just remember like being completely in awe of like his, you know, Warren Miller's narrating and his storytelling, and you know, being kind of drawn to like the visuals, the kind of the bigness that they would present on the big screen, right? And that was something that we were like, you know, when my brother and I were talking about, you know, film festivals, that was something that we referred to, where we were kind of like, you know what, we can kind of be like, you know, those experiences, or we can provide something like those experiences that people had, or that we had when we were younger with, you know, with the Warren Miller films. Cause fly fishing, you know, we don't really have that. And so anyways, that was, yeah, it was a cool thing, right? To be able to be a part of that too, and to be able to kind of go, you know what, there's room for, you know, there's room for kind of like seeing fly fishing on the big screen, because fly fishing is so visual. And that's one of the reasons why it's taken off so much of late, is because it's like, because what we do is like, it's, you know, it's hyper visual. And I can remember that even, you know, even in my younger years, where, you know, if I was fishing in a stream near a town or whatever, and there was walking trails, you know, people, they weren't stopping to watch people that, you know, were spin casting or float fishing. They would stop and watch me fly fish, because there's something kind of just naturally like graceful about, you know, about the cast, and about kind of watching a fly float on top of the water and seeing if anything's going to come up for it, right? There's just something like so visual about that just kind of begged to be like, hey, let's put this on the big screen for people.
Right. You know, getting back to this, to your comment about, you know, curated content and being a gatekeeper in a way. One thing that I did notice early on in with Fly Fusion was, and even just with the ads or the product section, actually throughout the magazine, I was always being opened up to new people and things. The current cover is that Amber Toner on the cover?
Yeah,
I,
yeah,
I
yeah.
I don't know. If she walked in the room, I would have no idea who she was. But I've been
Yeah.
a fan of her photography for so long, in part because of you guys, and it's something so great to not see ego in their photos.
Right.
It's just about a shared passion, and then with things like
Yeah.
products. I honestly wasn't familiar with Echo, for example,
Right.
until I was like, and so it's like, when there were three magazines that people were really reading way back when, and the same companies had the same spreads, it kind of limits your awareness of what's out there. And so, it turns out like echo rods are freaking awesome, and
Yeah.
I
Right.
because of, ad agreements and other magazines, like it took you guys for me to get a little bit more familiar with them and things like that. And so it's just been
Yeah.
great and refreshing in those ways too.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's like, I think that sometimes fly fishing can be, we can get into, you know, we become comfortable with certain products, and we can form certain camps even within our niche, and I think sometimes we forget that that we're not, we don't have to be elitist or exclusionary, that we're all kind of doing this together,
Yeah.
and there's different people that kind of enter at different times, right? And there's, fly fishing, it's not just, it's not just for people that can afford, $1,000 rod, right? It's, you want, it's for kind of anybody that wants to, that feels drawn to it. Like anybody that feels drawn to it should be able to go and find a rod that's in their price category,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And that's quality in their price category. And I have to say, one of the things that our magazine has done in the last number of years is we've done a rod review, and I've had the opportunity to work with Jeff Wagner, our casting editor, on a few of those rod reviews, and just learn an immense amount from him. He is so knowledgeable as far as casting. I don't know if I've ever seen anybody cast farther than that guy. It's insane, but just kind of learning from him, and then kind of learning how to test rods, and then seeing that kind of through all different levels, yeah, there's different components on rods that make a rod better. And yeah, there's different materials that go into kind of higher end rods, 100%. And can you tell the difference between like a mid-range rod and a high end rod? For sure you can. When you kind of put them all beside each other, you can do that 100%. But can you get a really good quality rod at the mid range, or even at an entry level? 100% you can today, which is such an amazing thing too, right? It just goes back to the fact that we live in such a just a wonderful time as far as fly fishing, not just information, but also technology, right? I've had the chance to go and visit a number of different rod manufacturers in kind of where they actually manufacture their rods, like right at home base type thing. And the brains that are involved in kind of like rod manufacturing, and the technology that they use, you're absolutely astounded by it. And so to be a person alive today who's just whether you're a student who can't, who might not be able to afford very much, but you're like, oh, I really want to get into fly fishing. Well, guess what? There's a brand and a company for you, and I love that. Or whether you're kind of like, oh no, I love kind of what this company represents, because they're all about the environment and they sell quality stuff. There's a company for you too, right?
Right.
And
Yeah.
so it's like, and I think that, in our magazine, we're kind of like, we represent all of that because we don't want fly fishing to be exclusionary at all. It's like, it's an open invitation, right? And if you come, you're going to be like, if you come and you want to learn a lot, kind of drink from the fire hose of information, because again, it's a steep learning curve. But if you come, man, it's like there's like so many different companies now that you can buy really amazing gear from. So yeah.
When I think about the IF4, the International Fly Fishing Film Festival, there's something different about what you guys do, from all the other films out there in this collection of films each year, and I can't put my finger on what it is. And I'm not asking for your secrets, but what goes into this every year, and how, like, what can you tell me that I'm seeing that I can't identify?
What's funny is so my brain is like racing right now, right? Because I'm like, okay, like how much do I share, right? Like how much do I give away? But then part of it too is like, I've had a few photographers come to me over the years and be like, and kind of like, and again, not naming any names, right? But I've had a few that have actually said to me like, I want a cover shot. Like, tell me what I have to do to get on your cover. And I'm like, yeah, no, well, we've got our photo guidelines and we've got all of that. But really, like, I can't, when I see it,
Okay.
I'm like, oh, that's it.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Or it's like kind of those of us that are involved in, in planning and stuff are like, we're like, oh, like, maybe we'll have a debate because there's actually like two or three, that's it. Right. And so we'll be like, and so I think it's similar with the film festival too. Like definitely the films go through, they go through a panel, right? Like we have people kind of from different portions of the industry that weigh in and that have kind of lots to say about, what should make it in and what shouldn't. And, sometimes you'll have like a really, really cool message, but the filming just isn't, it's not in a place like the cinematography might not be in a place where we can accept it, or, maybe it's like, it's got, good cinematography, or it's like something that's been maybe overexposed, kind of fly fishing wise. And so we try to be careful there, but if there's like, without kind of like giving you the nuts and the bolts, or maybe kind of the secret as to how we, get the Cadbury bar filled with creamy goodness. I think that what it is, if I could just generally state kind of what it is that might be a little bit different, is that we don't kind of, so we appreciate fish porn, but we don't see that as the end goal. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So we like, so I think that, when people go to a film festival, they want big fish. They want cool rises. They want, there's stuff that they want, and we know that they want that. And that's like, that's kind of like, that's the candy store. Do you know what I mean? That's going to the candy store and your eyes are like, as a kid, your eyes are like massive because you get to, because you've got 25 cents and you get to buy 10 candies, right? Maybe that's like back in the like 70s, you can do that. But, anyways, but, your eyes are big, and that's like, I think that's kind of the easy picking. That's the low hanging fruit. But we also strive to go a little bit beyond that, right? And kind of some of the messaging in our films where it's like, where we're not afraid to show people, films where, if somebody's had a pretty big life transition and it's the result of fly fishing, we're not afraid to show that and throw that into the mix. because we're like, because we realize that, you know, just as much as we want to, or as people are there to see a big fish, we also know that people go through, you know, big life changes at times. And sometimes it's the result of fishing, or sometimes it's fishing that kind of like makes sense out of that for them, where they can kind of escape to fishing or to fly fishing, or escape to a river and, you know, go and catch a few trout and allow life to kind of like start to make sense a little bit. And so I think that's part of I would say that's part of the formula too, that maybe you would see a little bit. I hope I haven't divulged too much information.
I don't think,
not enough, but hopefully I hit the sweet spot there.
I don't think you said too much at all. But you know, one of the things that I was thinking about when you were talking is, you know, if porn is not primary, then the story is going to come out. And it also made me think of this filmmaker that I want to work with right now. And I told him that I want him to watch two films, but one I keep pushing for. One's a surf film and one is a ski film. And in the ski film, the skiing is horrible. like there's not a lot of snow. And then the surfing film looks like they could have really used an iPhone to step up the footage. and the surfing's not very good either, but you know, they get to the heart of a good story, or at least, you know, are able to communicate things visually that others can't. And I think I see that a little bit too. And when I see some of these films. Yeah.
Well, very, very well put, Tim. With comments like that, be careful. We'll get you on the panel with like insight like that. But like one of the things that, you know, that you said that just kind of made me think a little bit more, which is story, right? Like, you know, we live in a time where, you know, kind of like we're very individualistic, which isn't a negative thing at all, right? But the thing that we all relate to in kind of our, you know, our individual silos, the things that we all relate to is story. Like we all appreciate, I think you would go a long ways to find somebody who wouldn't appreciate kind of story, right? And I think that the reason that we gravitate towards kind of story and narrative is because you know, we find community in narrative. We find that we're not alone, right? And that's kind of the steal. I think an author actually said that. You know, we read to know that we're not alone. We read kind of narrative to know that we're not alone. But that's part of it, right? And so I think that, you know, if you go to you know, to watch films and it's just kind of for like, if it's just for fish porn, and again, I'm not saying that we don't have that. It's there. Like there's massive visuals and stuff that we do, but we also do want to tell stories too, right? And I think that's what, you know, that's what a really good film does. Is it, you know, it tells a story. I think, like there was one that I had the opportunity to be in, I think it was 2 or 3 years ago, and it was called, the name of it was called The Road Home. And in that there was like, you know, there were kind of some of the great visuals, but what it did, what the film did was it had kind of like big mountain visuals and beautiful river visuals and kind of like everything that kind of was around the river was like part of that, where it showed all of that. But then it also kind of told a story too, which is just like, you know, which is just about a guy who kind of like, who gained insight and knowledge from kind of like, you know, from spending time on the river. And it was fun to be a part of, especially with the filmmakers that I was working with. It was so fun. But it was actually a couple of guys from your neck of the woods. And when I say your neck of the woods, I mean the United States of America.
Yeah, they're about 6 hours away. Same mountain range though. And country. You know, that's the perfect. I'm glad you brought up that film because one of the things that I've noticed about films that you are connected with is um, this. I mean, what I get excited about is like, you know, I've seen films with you doing some hella fly fishing, some extreme backcountry stuff through hiking,
Oh man.
car,
Yeah.
you know, by foot, by car, by helicopter. It's almost a
Yeah.
theme, and I'd like to know about, you know, what drives that. That's the hardest type of film to make happen. You know, let's hear more about your show.
Okay. Yeah. Well, that's a great observation, a great question too, Tim. Yeah. So the TV show, which we've taken a little bit of a hiatus on right now, just it was because of COVID. Actually, we were planning to go filming, and kind of everything kind of went by the wayside because of COVID. But we're getting back up on plane right now, which is really exciting. But kind of what drives kind of certain elements of the TV show is that generally speaking, like, yeah, we work with guides, and we want to, feature certain guides at times, but we want to create an experience. And one of the things that I'm super attracted to as far as fishing is really getting away. That's like, it's funny, I live in a place that, like on Vancouver Island, that really became popularized because of Roderick Haig Brown's writings. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with his writings or not, Tim, but he's a very popular, or he was a very popular Canadian writer, also a fly fisherman, kind of back in like the 60s and 70s, the 1960s and 1970s. And anyways, so that my neck of the woods where I live, it's a very popular area, and there's one river in particular that like, especially during salmon season, it's like, I don't know whether to call it a circus or combat fishing, or I don't know. It's like, it's lined up, and fishing etiquette is like out the window when it needs to happen kind of the most. And it's, and so I'm super attracted to, like, when I think of fly fishing, like, one of my greatest desires when I fly fish is to get away. It's to go to places that, that don't see a lot of traffic. And so I kind of assume that there's lots of people, and I shouldn't make assumptions, but I kind of assume that's something that a lot of people are attracted to, is like, oh, maybe one day I'll be able to go, do kind of a trip like that, or go somewhere super remote and not see a lot of people. And so that's one of the driving forces behind what we do, and kind of the planes, trains, and automobiles that it takes to get to some of the places that we have to get to.
John Candy.
But then yeah, exactly. Yeah, nice pick up on that. Yeah, that's awesome. Another driving force is that was that we wanted to we wanted each episode to have kind of themes as well. And so my co-host Jim and I, we'd basically sit down with the cinematographers, and then also one of the producers, my brother Chris, who's very much kind of behind the scenes on the filming location, or at the filming location. One of the things that we wanted to do was kind of theme and story as well, right? And that kind of getting back to story, we wanted kind of themes that that anglers would relate to. So that you'll notice that's very much present in kind of a lot of our TV filming, anyways, where we have where we set up the 20-minute episode, which is basically a half an hour episode for television. Where we'll set up that episode with a theme that kind of comes up front, but it's very visual. There's a voiceover, usually mine, that kind of comes across and kind of sets up the theme for that episode. And then when Jim McLennan, when we answer questions, like when we're talking kind of about the day or talking kind of through the day, we're in the back of our minds, we have the theme for that episode. And so that's how we film. That's how we end up kind of creating story. And then, the places that we go are just, a lot of times the result of kind of the desire to really get away. There was one episode that we did, and I don't want to rabbit trail too much, but there was one episode that we did that was like, it was one of the highlight episodes, and it was actually in season, in our first season. And I remember it so vividly. And it's because it literally took, which is scary from a production view, like standpoint, but it took like, almost half the day just to get to where we wanted to go. Because it was like, because there were bridges out, because of flooding from the previous year. And then there were fires that we ended up having to kind of, drive around, as far as like, roads being closed and such. So it took a long time to get there, but because of that, there hadn't been anybody that had fished up there that season. And let me tell you, it is the most visually stunning episode, as far as fish, because the fish were like, the water was clear. What normally a technical stream, the fish were just highly aggressive to kind of take kind of whatever was thrown at them that day. And it just made for a fantastic episode. And actually on that episode too, Paula Shear was fishing with us on that episode as well, which is really cool. And I've often said about Paula, or filming with Paula, that it's not fair, right? Because she's so much smaller than I am, so I always feel like her fish look bigger.
Yeah.
But I suspect that her fish just are bigger. She's such a good angler. She's so good.
She's obsessed.
That's a good way to put it.
I was on a boat with her in Mexico, and she hooked into her first permit. And then the guide was like, "There's another one," and like looked at me to try to get me to take a shot at that permit. I'm like, I am not getting between Paula and her first permit. So she got hers, and I'm very happy about that, because she was committed.
Yeah, she is super committed. Even in that episode that we were filming with her, she was the last on the water that day, and the guys, they kept the cameras rolling when Jim and I had kind of. And we weren't sitting back because we were exhausted or anything. We were sitting back because we had caught so many fish that day, and we're kind of like it's a wrap type thing. Like, this is awesome. And she just kept going, and she ended up catching like the biggest fish of the day. So that was pretty cool.
Nice.
But she's that way. She's very much that way.
Yeah, she loves trout, that's for sure. And it's what's also great is just seeing so much of the wilderness that Western Canada has, and it taps into your imagination. And then when you guys are catching these enormous bull trout and stuff, it's just it's like what you dream about.
Yeah. And bull trout, I have to say, like, I don't know. I think that when I say I have a favorite, I'm just lying to myself. I think any fish that's willing to take like a well-swung fly or a dry fly that's presented well, I think is my favorite fish. And so I don't know if it's bull trout or if it's steelhead or if it's West Slope cutthroat. I don't know. I love them all. And to be able to go to like remote locations and not only film but just kind of fish for them is like it's such an enormous blessing for me to be able to do that. I love that I can do that. And you know what, it's like, I know when we film, it's like we can make even a tough day, and normally we're pretty honest about our tough days when we're filming, where we'll actually say, it was a tough day and we only got a few today, but there's like, there's days where when you're fishing for, say a West Slope cutthroat or bull trout, there's days where, where you just like, where you feel like you're the best angler in the world. And then there's other days where it's just like, things can happen. So I guess it's just like any other type of fishing too, right? Kind of in Western Canada where you can, you can have the high days and you can have the low days. I just headed back to my hometown for a little bit of a vacation, kind of midsummer this year, and which is a town in the Rockies. It's where Fly Fusion headquarters is. If you ever drive through Cranbrook, British Columbia, and you see the biggest, I suspect that it's the biggest elk hair caddis in the entire world because it's out front of Fly Fusion headquarters, and it's not obviously a real elk hair caddis. It's like we had some sculptor kind of make one out of metals, and so it's like this. I would say it's like about a 10-foot elk hair caddis, like the size of it. It's quite large, but anyways, I went back and was fishing. I went back to my hometown, to a place where I knew when things were happening, and it was one of those times where it was just like, well, the streams weren't in shape yet, right? It was, we had a lot of snow this year in the Rockies, and then a really cool spring, and everything was behind, and so it was kind of unpredictable, and I find that a lot more nowadays with fly angling than kind of when I was younger, but where things can be a little more unpredictable, just weather-wise and that type of thing. But anyways, back to the bull trout. I was fishing kind of one of my favorite streams. I got onto it, and literally, like, kind of the first hole that I stopped at, I was floating it in a Watermaster, and the first hole that I stopped at, I caught this beautiful, like, 10-pound bull trout on, it was probably like my third cast or something like that. And wow. I thought to myself, okay, this is how this day is going to be, right? Like I totally was prepared for like the best day in the world. And then like probably 15, 20 minutes later, the stream just chocolated up. Like it just like, and I don't know why. And so I had to work hard for like one more bull trout for that entire 8-hour float. Like that was, I shouldn't say I just got one more bull trout. I caught one whitefish, which I refer to as the Rocky Mountain bonefish, as well. But it's like some days you have that are like that too. But that's okay because it's like, I had a day just the other day where it was, I went out for the last hour of daylight to one of my favorite streams that's kind of just not too far from my doorstep. And, I had one of those days where it was kind of a fish per cast, right? And it was like, okay, like that's exciting. But I think that the balance of the two is like, it reminds us that, that fly fishing is actually like, I don't know, I consider it the perfect pastime just because it's challenging some days. Some days it might seem a little bit easy. But then you get kicked in the butt and you're like, oh no, that I got to try really, really hard today in order to maybe just get one or two fish. Right. So anyway.
Well, yesterday, I think I've got some of your films and stuff in the back of my mind a lot, but yesterday someone called me and asked if I wanted to do a road trip to BC, and so he and I are going to start planning that. So this would be a good time for you to hide any topographic maps or a gazetteer or anything that gives me a glimpse into some of the cool places that you've gone, because it just seems unbelievable.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what, Tim, if there are some places that, that I go and film and that we don't name and that type of thing. And then, so I would, I'm kind of what's the word? I'm kind of a hypocrite this way. And I fully admit to it, where it's like, if you come to me and you're like, okay, so we're coming up to your neck of the woods to film, then I would give you like a certain set of locations. And then if you're like, oh no, we're just coming up just to like, just to bounce around, and do you have any like recommendations? I'd be like, Tim, literally, if you tell anybody, I will come down to, where do you live?
I was just looking at a map. I'm 7 hours and 35 minutes south of you in Livingston, Montana.
Yeah, so I would have two different lists for you, but yeah, just
I understand, and
yeah,
and while I think I'm trustworthy, I asked somebody a couple of months ago. I'm like, "Hey, where'd you fish on Saturday or whatever?" And he's like, "Oh,
yeah.
a section of water below a tailwater."
Yeah.
And he lives
I
in
love
he lives in Colorado where there are only 3 rivers that aren't tailwaters. So I'm like, cool,
that aren't
thanks.
tailwaters.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I love that response. It's like, yeah, and I have some of those. I have some of those like canned responses too, right? Where it's like, oh yeah, where'd you get those fish over the weekend? I just be like, oh, there's it's a little stream just north of here,
Yeah.
um, north by southeast or west. I can't remember. It's just I can't
Well,
remember.
I live a couple miles or a mile or so from the Yellowstone. So when he asked where I fish, I was like, a little section of a freestone. It, like, if this is how we're gonna if this is how we're gonna do this, you know.
Yeah, yeah, you're like two can play this game.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, and I realize the discrepancy kind of in what I do sometimes because like there's also flies that that I use that I don't really want to share with anybody because it's like oh man that is candy, right? Where it's just like, oh, the West Slope, they just can't lay off of that, or a summer steelhead, it just can't lay off of that. I'm just like, oh, I don't want to share that fly, but so sometimes I'm a little bit tongue in cheek, and even though I'm part of a magazine where we're like trying to get everybody all the information, sometimes it's like, oh, but I have a little bit that I just want to keep to myself.
Yeah, and I'm sure that you guys
but
have, and so
but I think that like all anglers are like that, right? Especially if you've had to work hard for something to discover. There's something about us that's like I think we can fool ourselves by telling ourselves that, well, you don't want to steal anything from any sense of accomplishment from other people just by telling them. Like, you want them to be able to go out and figure it out for
right.
themselves
Yeah,
too,
true.
like some of those like intricacies. But yeah, but maybe I'm just lying to myself when I say
No,
that.
no. Well, when we were talking about the International Fly Fishing Film Festival, you'd mentioned how with COVID and with the show, things got a little disrupted and have slowed down. But you haven't slowed down. You've got a new book.
Yeah, yeah, and yeah, me and apparently like a gazillion other people wrote books during COVID. So
It started podcast.
it was like apparently it was like everybody's doing it now.
Yeah.
So no, did I through the yeah through kind of the COVID years, I wrote a book, and it's called Last Summer on the Stage, and it's interesting because it's a different type of book, especially since with the magazine that I work for, it's like where it's all kind of like it's all information and knowledge based, and we live very much in kind of like an information and knowledge kind of like heavy time, but this is a fictional book, so it's a story about a kid or a young guy, kind of a 17-year-old guy. It's a coming of age story. It's about a kid named Ryan who grows up in in the Rocky Mountains, in small town kind of Rocky Mountains, and it's his last summer kind of fishing. He's grown up fishing, like fly fishing, and it's his last summer fishing his very favorite stream in the Rockies, before he heads off to university. And him being kind of like young and kind of naive about kind of where he's off to, he doesn't know if he'll ever be back, and so he's trying to make the most of his summer, of his last summer, kind of fishing this stream that's meant a lot to him. And so that's kind of what the story, what kind of drives the story, but it's very much about kind of who he comes across and the relationships that he begins to form kind of like as he's fishing that summer. Like he has a best friend, and his best friend's sister who he fishes a lot with, and who they end up kind of going on their first float trip together. And then and Ryan, he even stumbles across, very accidentally, and it happens very early on in the novel, but he also stumbles across this old kind of recluse that's separated himself from kind of culture, and he lives in this cabin on his favorite river, which is called the Sage. That's the title of the novel, Last Summer on the Sage. But he's like, he meets this guy that's excommunicated himself from culture. And I absolutely love, there's a few storylines that I absolutely love in the novel, but that's very much one of them. This character, Jack, is his name. And he ends up kind of becoming this mentor to Ryan. And in that kind of mentorship, cause they both fly fish and they both kind of end up accidentally kind of on some of the same runs together. Ryan kind of, through his youthful naivety, kind of like essentially saves Jack in the sense that he makes Jack realize again that there's actually kind of a goodness about kind of humanity, something that he's wanted to essentially get away from because he just feels that it's like, it's so kind of, it's just so difficult and corrupt. And so he begins to grow as the result of like his relationship with Ryan. And that became kind of one of my very favorite stories in the novel. But yeah, so I'm just over the moon about it. I've got a number of like just lots of different feedback on it right now. And it's like, and just lots of really positive feedback. And one of the coolest things that I heard, actually, there's a few really cool things that I heard as far as feedback. One of them was somebody told me, they messaged me and said, I read your novel and I'm not a fly fisherman, but somebody I know who fly fishes gave it to me. And they said, oh, you have to read this. And I read it and now I want to fly fish. And I was like, oh my goodness, that's so cool to hear that. And then I had another really cool kind of like anecdotal kind of story about my novel. And it was this one dad who I actually went fishing with a few weeks ago. He said to me, "Oh, I've been reading your novel to my son every night." And his son's like, I think about 12 or 13. He said, "I've been reading your novel to my son every night before bed, and it's it's meant a lot to us to kind of be able to read through it together." And then I ended up going fishing with that dad and his son kind of after they had finished the novel, and the son said to me, "Oh," he said, "Mr. Bird," he said. Your novel is my favorite story that I've ever read." And that that totally warmed my heart. Just the thought that, a dad was reading to his son about a story about fly fishing kind of before he went to bed. And then to hear that from his son was really cool. So anyways, yeah, the novel's called Last Summer on the Sage. It's kind of, it's definitely not like, it's not like this story is based on real life type thing. It's definitely fictional, but there are parts of the story that very much like take root in kind of some of the things that, some of the stories that I had growing up fly fishing in the Rockies. So anyways, yeah, that's kind of the gist of it without giving away too much. If you're somebody that, because I think that good art, and I, far be it from me to kind of like, say something that I've written is good art, but kind of what I hoped and what I respond to, and we've talked about this a little bit, Tim, just with kind of like touch points as far as like, when people sit and watch something or when they read something or, when they listen to something that they kind of like identify with and hold on to. I think that's kind of what good art does as well. And I hope that kind of my story, like for people that read it, I hope that that's what it does for people as well, where it's like, where it kind of, like, I think that everybody, like if you've grown up fly fishing, kind of regardless of whether it's in the Rockies or, kind of in the prairies or, wherever it is, if you've grown up doing it, and like you leave the place that you've grown up and the streams that kind of nurtured you as a kid, then you can identify with the fact that you might not, that you have to grapple with the concept that you might not be back to fish those streams, because kind of at 17 when you're heading off, or 18 when you're heading off to university, you don't know if, you don't know what it looks like to kind of come back. And so if you're somebody that would resonate with, please, buy my novel. If you're somebody that likes kind of like happy endings, where maybe like, life has kind of like gotten away from you at points where you're like, and you've seen it kind of come back together. Well, this would resonate kind of with you too, because there's very much that happens in the novel, especially through Jack's character, where there's portions of his life that have kind of gotten away from him, and that kind of end up being restored because of this relationship that he has with the main character. So there's that would resonate. There's there is a bit of a kind of a love story that happens in the novel too, where, and so anybody that's kind of been 17 and kind of fallen in love and felt like it was kind of the biggest thing in the world, it would resonate with you too, because there's that story that kind of runs in the novel a little bit too, with the main character and his best friend's sister. So anyways, but it's a cool story. I think it is anyways, because I wrote it. So
where can folks go to learn more about the book?
Yeah, for sure. So if you want to like learn more about it, if you want to read a little write up on it, or if you want to like buy a copy of it, you can go on to flyfusionmag.com, and there's a little store icon that you can click on, and you'll find a few books on there, because Fly Fusion actually has a book division called Fusion Books, and that's where you'll find my book is there if you want to purchase it. And then you can also, if you want to support Jeff Bezos and the gang, you can go on to Amazon.com down in the States, or Amazon.ca up in Canada. And you can purchase it there just by typing in Last Summer on the Sage, so the title, and then my name, Derek Bird, and it'll come up. And if you if you read it and you want to give a good review, that'd be awesome. Because I think that it'll, my hope is that it'll kind of like end up filtering into fly fishing culture. I would love that. And I think that one of the reasons that I would love that, not to keep rambling on about it, but one thing that I do want to add is just that, like, I know for myself as a young angler growing up, as a young fly angler growing up, I can remember, reading A River Runs Through It, and then also like watching the movie, and just being like in absolute awe of the way that, that Norman MacLean and then Robert Redford kind of told that story. And I was in awe to the point where, like, in whatever year it was, 1992 or 1993, I remember sitting in the theater and watching that and feeling like there were portions of my story that were told. And just sitting in the theater and kind of like sitting back when it was over and wanting more, right? Like just wanting like more to happen. That's how I felt. And like, even to the point where, and this is going to sound funny, but even to the point where when I finished the novel and when it was published, I'm kind of 1 degree of separation away, or I know somebody that knows Robert Redford, like that actually works for him. And so I emailed him, and I'm like, hey, if I send you a copy, will you like give it to Robert Redford?
Yeah.
And so I did. So I signed a copy for Robert Redford, if you can believe that. I like wrote a little inscription in it saying like, thank you so much for the, for the movie that you made back in the 90s, because it meant a lot to me, and I felt like kind of you told my story, and I kind of wrote that in there and then sent it off, and there's not a happy ending to that, because he didn't get back to me.
You never know, and that's
a great. That'd be cool. And he's like, he got back to me, and he's like, yeah, I love this book.
Yeah, speaking of nostalgia, then that movie, but for him as an artist, that's maybe the happy ending was for him, and that's a great way for his work to come back to him in a meaningful way. Not that I'm sure that it hasn't already, but that film's timeless. Actually, last year at some point, I was driving by a movie theater in Bozeman, and they were going to be showing A River Runs Through It, and I just thought, how great would that be to see in the theater again? So,
right,
yeah.
Right. Did you see it in the theater for the first time, or did you rent it? Where were you at in life?
Whew. I think my grandmother owned the video.
Okay.
It came out when I was 11 or 12, and then I think she had it on video and I watched it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because she belonged to
It,
like one of these like movie clubs. And so when I'd go to her
yeah.
house, I'd watch, whatever she had. River Runs Through It.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so,
It impacted me so much that, like, I can remember I worked for BC Parks as a job as well, doing presentations for them. And I remember doing a fly fishing presentation for like people that were in these campsites, right? In these BC kind of campsites. And I remember doing a fly fishing presentation. I did other ones too, like ones on bear awareness and all that kind of stuff. This is when I was going to university as well. And I remember it impacted me so much that after I did my fly fishing presentation, I quoted kind of the end of the book, right? That part where he's talking about how kind of all existence fades into a being that is soul, and the count. I can't remember the quote now, but anyways. So I remember quoting that at the end and just feeling like so connected with it.
good.
And yet the people that I was talking to, none of them were fly fishermen. They were just campers, right? And so they were just kind of like staring at me as I'm like,
That's hilarious.
quoting this like essentially like prose that's kind of dripping like poetry, right?
Right.
I'm like quoting it to them. But it was funny because after that, like one person, it's so funny, like, how kind of memories get triggered. Anyways, one person came up to me after that presentation and was like, he was from Australia, and he's like, "Oh, you fly fish?" I said, "Yeah." And he like started talking about how much he loves fly fishing. It's like his biggest dream to go fly fishing in BC, and he's here, but he doesn't know where to go and he doesn't have gear. And I said, "Oh, really?" I said, "Well, I'll tell you what." I said, "I'm off tomorrow. My buddies and I, we're going to like this one river." I said, "I've got gear. If you get a license, we'll pick you up and we'll take you." And he was like so excited. He was
Cool.
over the moon. And so we picked him up and we took him. And that day, it was like the most insane bull trout day that I've ever had. Even to this day, like it was like every few casts we were catching like kind of like 5 to 15 pound bull trout. It was absolutely
Wow.
insane. And he was like, he had the mouth of like this extreme, like kind of this extreme, what I would think like, if a biker and a trucker kind of like got together and had a kid, this was his mouth. He like everything was F this and F that. The best effing day that I've ever effing had in my entire existence. And like, F, you got another one. And everything like out of his mouth was just like F this. And oh my goodness, it's so funny that I kind of like remember that now.
That's funny.
Yeah, but the funny thing was, sorry, I got sidetracked on the fact that he was like, that he had kind of this mouth where it was just kind of like introducing Canadians to all this different new language. But he like, the funny thing was, that's what it was, is that he probably thought that that's what fly fishing in Canada was like all the time.
Oh, true.
That was his only experience,
Yeah.
right? Oh my goodness,
That's
that was
funny.
great. What a great day that was. But,
Well, you talked about triggering memories. The last time I did a presentation to young people on fly fishing, I remember I had a PowerPoint and I was getting ready to talk, and this kid was like, before you get started, we just want to let you know we're all here because we didn't sign up for anything else and we're not interested. And I'm like, no, fly fishing's, I was like, fly fishing is cool. And they're like, it isn't. I was like, no, I swear, if you try it, it can be really great. And the kid was like, it's terrible. We're not interested. I was like, okay. So that was the last presentation I've given. And then, a river runs through it. It made me think about a teacher I had in high school. I was not a great student really until I got to his class, and he sort of inspired, me to be interested in academics more than I was. And at the end of the school year, he gave me a copy of A River Runs Through It. And I recently found out that he lives in Bozeman, and I'm in Livingston, so he's the next town over. And so I'm sure we'll get together soon. And I'll say this,
Oh, that's a cool
yeah,
story.
and it meant a lot. And I'll say this too. I had another teacher in high school, and I lent him my U2 bootleg, and he gave it away to somebody. So I will not be getting together with him anytime soon. And and like you know, it was great to have a YouTube bootleg for a period of time.
Yeah, that's right. You know what's funny is that like when you said that, so um, the novel that I wrote, it's got it's got parallel plot, and it actually starts out in the classroom. Like
Huh.
that's where the novel starts, is in the classroom, and it's a teacher. It's actually a teacher teaching the novel to the class and trying to convince the class that they might enjoy it.
Oh, okay.
And there's only one kid in the class who's excited about the novel because he's a fly angler. The kid is,
Oh, cool.
and so that's how the novel starts out. So, anyways, that gives you a little bit more. But that's cool that you had that teacher, right? That inspired you and gave you a copy of the novel, right? Gave you a copy of something that was like, oh, like I could see you enjoying something like this, and kind of met you where you were at. Which I think at that age, oftentimes, there's a lot of teenagers who aren't treated like kind of human beings from people that are older, that are adults, and I think that's kind of an enormous tragedy because really they're looking for guidance and to be exposed to things that they might kind of like fall in love with for a lifetime, right? And so that's a really cool story that you have with that one teacher.
Yeah, it makes me remember that I do want to get together with him soon. So I'll be doing that. Yeah, and we'll talk about the book.
Yeah, yeah, that would be really cool.
Well,
Yeah.
for folks who want to see more of what you're up to, what are some of the outlets you recommend for following the many projects you have?
Yeah. Yeah. So the magazine, I always write a column in the magazine. I have to say I'm not super, super kind of up to date and good kind of at keeping up to date on social media. Like I have an Instagram account. But yeah, so that's a place that, you can find me. And, if you do buy a book or something like that, and you want to message me and ask me any questions about it, that'd be a place to do it. And that's I think it's at Derek Bird, I believe that's all it is. So there's that. And then, yeah, and then kind of through the novel, you can kind of get inside my brain that way. There'll be more kind of Fly Fusion television. I think we call it Fly Fusion series now because it's going to be branded a little bit differently, kind of coming out of COVID, and so that's going to be kind of on the horizon as well. Yeah, so there's kind of those different ways right now, but that's kind of, yeah, those are the ways.
Excellent. And you are at Derek R. Bird, for for and so
Thanks.
for those who are listening, he might not be too active on Instagram, but I just wanted to make sure they didn't go to the other guy.
Remember what it is, right? Thank you, Tim. I learned something.
Well, and actually, I saw that I wasn't following you, so now I am, and so I'm glad
Oh,
that we
okay,
got that
good,
worked out.
perfect.
Well, thanks for
Yeah.
coming on. I really enjoyed this conversation. I've got a big smile on my face. This was a lot of fun, and I'd love to have you on again sometime.
Yeah, Tim, that would be great. And then if I can just add one more thing,
Yeah.
I do want to say that I really appreciate what you're doing. I appreciate the fact that you're kind of a collector of kind of information, and you kind of like project it and make sure that the fly fishing community is aware of what's going on, and kind of all the different all the different events, and kind of like film, and like just everything that you're a part of. And so keep doing what you're doing, because I appreciate kind of what you do. And like I said, we've had the chance to sit down and have dinner together before and kind of converse, and I really appreciate you as a person too. So So keep it up. You're doing an awesome job. And yeah, and hopefully we'll fish together at some point. That'd be really cool. If you come up to BC and we end up in the same place, I'd love to fish with you, man.
That sounds great. And I appreciate those comments. That means a lot. And yeah, and even if I come up there and you show me your secondary spots, I'm down. So
yeah.
Well, good. Well, again, thanks for coming on. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, you bet. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I was going to say I'll pull out the faux topographical map, the one that
right. Yeah.
the circled spots, you know, that aren't the real spots. But yeah, no, thank you for having me so much, Tim. I appreciate it.
Thank you.